Hey, good morning. Man, what a start to the day. Band is just rocking it. Still kicking off a new series. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Really glad that you've decided to spend some of your day with us today. And like I say, as Russ mentioned, we're kicking off a new series called Bad Words. Looking at those words from the Bible that kind of get us worked up and riled up when we hear them. Words like guilty, judgment, punishment, sin. Or how about today's word? Obey. I'm not sure about you, but I'm just not a fan of the word obey. Just something stirs in me every time I'm told to do something. And if I was a bet man, I'd go all in on the bet that the same is true for you on some level or another. Quite a few years ago, I think before the turn of the century, my wife and I found ourselves in Quesnel. Yeah, I'm admitting we went to Quesnel, but we went there to visit her brother and his family. And shortly after arriving, her brother came out to me and he said, "Hey, do you want to go on a tour? I'll show you around town." And I was like, "Yeah, let's go." And I wasn't excited because I got to see Quesnel, because Quesnel's Quesnel, but because I was going to be able to see it in his fully restored 1970s Dodge Coronet 440. It was complete with this 350 horsepower Magnum V8 that he had totally rebuilt himself. He was a mechanic by trade. He put these fancy chrome mags on it that were wrapped in these radial TAs for gripping the road. I mean, this thing literally ate pavement for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. It was an awesome car. And so anyway, we hop in this car to go for this cruise around town. And he fires it up. And after he fired it up, he looked over at me and he said, "Put your seatbelt on." And I looked back at him and I said, "Why would I want to put my seatbelt on, man? We're in the middle of nowhere. Besides, it's my vacation. This is my time. I don't need a seatbelt." He just proceeded to put it in reverse. We backed out of the driveway and off we went. And we kind of weaved through some of these residential streets at first, and he was pointing out, "Hey, my buddy lives here, and if you take this road, you'll end up here." The typical stuff that you talk about when you're showing someone your town. Well, eventually we arrive at Highway 97, and he hangs a right, and he just punches this car. And I'll never forget the feeling. I was just like thrown back in my seat as this thing gripped the road and took off. And I was my face was hurting. I was smiling so much. And we cruised along, and eventually the highway goes right through the center of town. So, you have to slow down. And so he did that. And we're cruising through town, and I'm just taking in the sights. I'm looking at all the different businesses and the people on the street, not really paying attention to where we're going. Well, that's when my brother-in-law hangs this hard left into a gas station. Completely caught me off guard. And so imagine my surprise when the inertia threw me into my door and the door opened and out I went. Skidded across this parking lot, rolling and everything else. I came to a stop like mere inches from this gas pump. And now luckily, I had some road rash and some bumps and scrapes. I think my ego was bruised more than anything. But my brother-in-law, after he made sure I was okay, he just looked down at me and said, "I told you to put your seatbelt on." And he was right. I just chose not to. I just chose not to obey his instructions. He said, "I don't need a seatbelt." And I went my own way, right? So here's a question. What is that about? Why is it we choose not to obey, even when it's in our best interest? Because we often do. And if you've got kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. How does it go for you when you ask your kids to go to bed? Brush their teeth, comb their hair, do their homework. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There's experts in the field of psychology that study this stuff. And they call this feeling, this need for us to inherently disobey, to rebel against orders, things we're asked to do. They call it psychological reactance. There's actually a name for it. In short, what they mean by that is it's your brain, my brain's reaction when we feel a threat to our freedom or we think that our choices are being limited or restricted. This cranial response often results in feelings of us feeling annoyed, angry, panicked, when rules or guidelines are put in place that we feel will restrict or control us. And often, you know what the result is? You know what the result is. We do the opposite of what we're asked to do, right? It's like there's this inner rebel inside you and I that is just there waiting to be awakened. And it's awakened when we're told that we have to do something or can't do something. And then it kind of wakes up and whispers to us, you're not actually going to let them tell you what to do, are you? And that someone could be a parent, a coach, a teacher, God. We know what the answer is. It's like, heck no, we won't go. I'm not doing anything that I don't want to do. And just so you know, this whole you're not the boss of me attitude is certainly not new to the 21st century. Yeah, we may have a scientific name for it, but this goes way, way back. In fact, we see this whole thing play out in the very first story in the Bible, the creation story. God creates everything we see. He creates the world as we see it. And then he creates man and woman. And he places them smack dab in the middle of paradise. I mean, everything is perfect. The weather is perfect. The temperature is perfect. The relationship between man and woman is perfect. The relationship between God and humankind is perfect. God comes to me and says, all of this is yours to enjoy. Go manage it. Go rule it. Do anything you like, except don't eat from that tree in the middle of the garden. Whatever you do, don't even touch it. What happens? The serpent, we read, was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. And one day he asked the woman, did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? Of course we may eat fruit from the trees of the garden, the woman replied. It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we're not allowed to eat. God said you must not eat of it or even touch it. If you do, you will die. You won't die, the serpent said to the woman. God knows that your eyes will be opened and you, as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. Listen to these words. The woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. And then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. You know, it's basically this whole story, Satan comes along in the middle of paradise and says, you're not actually going to let God tell you what you can and cannot do, are you? You going to let him boss you around? And it's like this inner rebel was fanned into flame. And that inner rebel has inhabited us all ever since. Which goes a long way in explaining our proclivity to want to, like the band sang earlier, go your own way, to go our own way, to do what we want to do. But here's the thing. It's not like we never obey, right? We obey all the time. We show up to work on time. You know, your boss or company says these are your hours. That's when you show up. We wear our seatbelts. Okay, actually, that's a stupid example after my opening story, but you know what I mean. There are times we obey, which raises the question, why? Why is it we sometimes choose to obey? Well, I want to throw out an idea for you. I want to suggest that we obey for 4 primary reasons. The first primary reason that we often choose to obey is out of fear. More precisely, more accurately, fear of consequences if we don't obey. As an employee, you do what your boss asks you to do. Why? Because if you don't, you're going to lose your job. As a child, it's always better to obey your parents. Why? Because if you don't, it could result in some very uncomfortable consequences. For me, I remember as a teen, the biggest stick my parents had to use to get me to comply and do as they asked me to do was the fear of being grounded. I mean, being grounded from being allowed to watch TV, go out with your friends, being grounded from the use of the car. I mean, for a teen, man, that's scary stuff. You hear that all your buddies are going out and you can't go? You got to stay home? And right next to that fear of grounding, the one way my parents, would kind of leverage their authority was they would threaten to withhold my allowance, which was kind of like a double coupon thing for them, because now not only did I have to do what they said, I had to do it for free. We obey stoplights, stop signs, road signs of all kinds. And it's not because we're particularly fond of them, doing the speed limit, stopping at a stop sign, stopping at a red light. We do it because we're afraid of the consequences if we don't. First reason we tend to obey is fear. Second, I believe we tend to obey is trust. We obey because we trust the person who is asking or telling us to do something, even when we don't even know them. A few years ago, I found myself at Six Flags in Southern California. This is like a little piece of heaven on earth, if you like roller coasters. I was on a motorcycle trip with my son-in-law, Jeff. It was the only scheduled stop on our bike trip, because that's what makes a motorcycle trip so great, is there are no schedules. You just get up and you just end up somewhere in the afternoon. But this is the one stop we wanted to make. If you love roller coasters and you've never been, you got to go. It's way safer than that action park in New Jersey we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where it seemed like somebody was dying on a regular basis because safety was like 4th or 5th on the list. But safe or not, here's the thing. We've all heard the saying, there's no guarantees in life, right? That's what makes roller coasters and thrill rides so thrilling. Because there's the chance, albeit small, there's the chance that things could quite literally go off the rails, right? And so every ride we went to, and some of them were like, I didn't even know the human body could withstand such forces, but on every ride we went to, there was an attendant who made sure we were caged in, buckled in, belted in to the little car that we were sitting in. And then they would tell us what to do and not to do. Things like, keep your hands inside the car at all times, keep your head back against the headrest, things like that. And we followed exactly what they said. Why? Because even though we had no idea who these people were or what they were like, we trusted them and their training and their experience. That if we listened to them, they were actually keeping us safe. They were keeping us in the fun zone and out of the death zone, right? We will obey someone that we trust. Third primary reason we tend to trust is reward. This is how you train a dog. Sit and you give him a treat. There's a reward for it. But we will often obey where there's a payoff for us personally when we obey. I remember my grade 8 French class. Oh, man, out of the 20 or 30 of us, I can't remember how many were in there, but there's only like 2 of us that actually wanted to be there. I wasn't one of them. Suffice it to say that class I was in was the most unruly bunch ever. And I'm sure after each class, the teacher probably went to counseling. It was that bad. But I remember this one particular day. It was a Friday. The weather was really nice. And the only thing standing between freedom of the weekend for me and my classmates was the last class of the day, which happened to be French. Now, the teacher must have been exhausted, not only after a long week and a long day, but now because he now had to deal with the class from hell. How else to explain what happened next? After we all got into the class, after the bell rang, he somehow got some semblance of control and quieted us down a little bit. But then he said, "I'll make you a deal." Well, man, the place just went super quiet. We all sat down. We're all eyes front. And he said, "Look, if you do as I say and you get your work done without whining and complaining, I'll let you out early." Man, it was like that room that was full of devils, all of a sudden was full of nuns. We just all of a sudden, everyone's doing exactly as they were asked. And we got out early. There was a reward for our obedience to do what he said to do. Check this out. There was a monk. His name was Bernard of Clairvaux. And he said this. He says, "We cajole the unwilling, not the willing, with promises and rewards. Who offers men rewards for doing what they want to do? Do we pay hungry men to eat? Do we pay for thirsty men to drink?" And then he goes on, and in the context of obeying God, this monk says this: "The soul that loves God seeks no other reward than that God whom it loves." Were the soul to demand anything else, then it would certainly love the other thing and not God. It's interesting, isn't it? But that leads to what I believe is the other reason that we will obey someone. And it's love. We'll obey someone we love and who we know loves us. On the night before Jesus was crucified, he had one last meal with his closest friends, his disciples. It's called the Last Supper. We celebrated it last week. And during that meal, Jesus shared, he got really honest with those he was following, and he let them in on all these things that were going to happen. Like, it wasn't they might happen, they were going to happen. And he shared how later that evening he was going to be betrayed, and then arrested, beaten, and ultimately crucified on a Roman cross. Understandably, his friends were like, what are you talking about? Like, one of us is going to betray you? You're crazy. That's not going to happen. And after he shared all of this with them, right just before they left this room that they were in to go outside, he looked them in the eye. Just imagine him looking them each in the eye, making eye contact with them to make sure he had their attention. And he said this to them: "If you love me, keep my commands." You notice the emphasis there? The emphasis is first on love. The actions of keeping and obeying come after. If you love me, keep my commands. Jesus didn't say, obey me to show me that you love me. He didn't say, keep my commands and you'll get a reward for it. He didn't say, keep my commands or else. He said, if you love me, keep my commands. As I mentioned earlier, we would all agree that life would be so much better if our kids just listened to us, right? If they would just do what we ask them to do, life would be so much better for everyone involved. But here's the thing. I think if we're really honest, I think there's something more to it than that. I think there's something more that we desire other than their obedience. And I would suggest that it's this. What we really want is their hearts. Our kids might obey us, but the question is, do they know that we love them? Do we actually have their hearts? You know, as Jesus spent those last few hours with his closest friends, many he had spent 3 years with, sweating and laughing and crying and eating with, who he connected on such a deep level, who loved them beyond anything they could even begin to imagine. He didn't simply want their obedience. He wanted their hearts. Because if he had that, if he had their hearts, if he knew how loved they were, they would be open to obeying him. And the same holds true for you and me today. Above anything else, Jesus wants your heart. He wants my heart. Because if he has it, then he has us. And we'll be far more willing and open to obeying what he asks us to do. And his best friend, a guy named John, who wrote the fourth book of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, was named after him. He said, loving God means keeping his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. If you continue reading in chapter 14 of this book, right as they're finishing their meal together, Jesus says to them, I don't have much more time to talk to you. Because the ruler of this world, and he's referring to Satan, the devil, the same one that came and tempted Adam and Eve. He says, he approaches. He has no power over me, but, and don't miss what Jesus says next here, he says, but I will do. In other words, I will obey. I will submit. I will abide by. I will follow what the Father requires of me, so that the world will know that I love the Father. And so what is it that God the Father asked Jesus to do? Well, I think Paul, the Apostle Paul, puts it best in a letter that he wrote to some first century Christians living in the city of Philippi. And he wrote this, listen to this. Though he, Jesus, he's referring to, was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. That's the Christmas story. God coming to this planet to become one of us. That incarnation, you know, the incarnate, putting on meat. God did that. And it says, and when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. I mean, just think about that for a moment. God, who created everything, including you and I, came to this planet and allowed himself to be crucified at the hands of his own creation. That is absolutely mind-blowing to me. You know, when you love someone, you naturally want to honor and respect them. And when you know that they love you back, it is far easier to trust that their advice, their instructions, their wisdom is given with your best interest in mind. And I can't think of a better example of love and honor than what Jesus did on the cross. I just can't. You know, it can be easy to hear or see that word obey and just get our backs up and go, you can't tell me what to do. It just stirs up that inner rebel that's in us. And it's more so even when it's in the context of church, with that whole mentality of, you better behave or else. But imagine what life would be like if we obeyed what God asked us to do. Now, you may be tuning in this morning and going, I don't even know if God exists. I'm still trying to figure out my higher power and all that type of stuff. Awesome. So let's just take the God piece and put that aside for a moment, okay? We'll just put that aside. And let's look at the last 6 commandments out of the 10 commandments. First 4 have to do with our relationship with God. The last 6 are all relational between all of us, human to human, okay? So whether you believe in God or not, let's just take him out of the equation and imagine for a moment what life would be like if we honored our moms and dads. Imagine what life would be like if we didn't steal from one another. If we didn't murder one another. Imagine what life would be like if we didn't lie to one another. If we didn't commit adultery. If we didn't covet our neighbor's stuff. Just imagine. With that in mind, listen to these words of Jesus. Just imagine he's saying these, he's looking right at me, he says, I have loved you. I have loved you, even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. It's the beautiful thing about following Jesus. He never asks us to do anything that he is not willing to do himself. I have told you these things so that you will be, get this, filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. So in a way, there is a reward when we obey God. Here's the thing. God doesn't want you or me to obey him out of a place of fear or manipulation. He wants you and I to obey him from a place of love. And it's that love that leads you and me to that place of true, pure joy. And who of us couldn't use some of that? The word obey in and of itself can stir up all kinds of emotions for us, often negative in nature, which is why we often see it as one of those bad words. But as we've talked about and explored in our time together, I hope that you can see that it's not a bad word. It's a very good thing for us. And it all starts with trust. And so my hope is that wherever you find yourself with God, you would begin to just take a step toward him. To get to know him better than you currently do, to learn to trust him more than you currently do, with the hopes that you'll begin to obey him more than you currently do. And experience that joy that comes with that. Really glad I get to be on this journey with you. I invite you to pray with me. God, there's just something, I know for me personally, when somebody tells me to do something, there's something in me that just wants to push back. And I don't know if it's a fear of control or whatever it happens to be. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's wrapped in it that we even talked about this morning. But, man, I just pray for myself and for all of those listening that maybe struggle with that to just look at your story and how you've written us into it. And how what you ask us to do isn't burdensome. You're not weighing us down. If anything, you're taking the weight off. Just my prayer would be that we would trust you more. That we would begin to even just scratch the surface and see how much you truly do love us. Just thank you for your patience with us when we do go our own way and do our own thing. Thank you for loving us. And we pray this in your most precious name. Amen.